So, getting it wrong, common pitfalls in risk assessment. So carrying out, so these are typical mistakes being highlighted by the health and safety executive as being regular problems with risk assessments that they have found in their inspections. So typical mistakes made in risk assessment process. Carrying out a risk assessment for a decision already made. So you need to resist the pressure of management when they say something is going to happen in a certain way, and you need to work out, so you need to make it clear to them that if the risk assessment does not support that method of working, then they need to be open-minded to another approach. And so this can require some real salesmanship for the person doing the risk assessment. The same goes for getting the employees to buy into control measures you want them to use. And so this again can require some real salesmanship. And that's why if you involve both managers and employees, frontline staff in the risk assessment process from very get-go, then you will find that they buy into the process and their level of awareness is raised. Using a generic risk assessment when a specific one is needed. So if you're doing manual handling where it is a significant risk in a workplace, and a task individual load environment approach should be made in order to satisfy the requirements of the manual handling operations regs, then a generic risk assessment, which you would use for the slip, strips and falls in that workplace, may not be adequate. Forgetting to look for industry best practice to guide the assessment. So industry best practice and approved codes of practice are two excellent sources of guidance and both freely available on the internet with simple Google searches. Sometimes industry best practice is produced by the HSE, but very commonly it's produced by industry bodies that represent the industry, such as if you're looking at organizations that cover nursing, then they would be a good source of advice for industry best practice for manual handling. If you're looking at exposure to noise, it's likely you'll find some guidance around door staff representative organizations. So consider risk based on individuals when it is better to consider groups. And so consider your groups first and then consider your individuals, but don't consider one or the other. Only considering risk from single activities rather than combinations of activities. So be aware that your hazards may arise, for instance, in slips and trips if they're carrying out manual handling at the same time, because very often they won't be able to see their feet. Salami slicing, so spreading the risk by exposing lots of workers to a high risk but for short periods of time. So you should take an approach of considering a theoretical worker exposed all of the time, because people go off sick, they do double shifts in the more hazardous areas. When things get busy, the controls you put in place, if you've got a rush on to satisfy an order, may not be adhered to. So this salami slicing approach is commonly used where you just rotate people's jobs in order, so rather than coming up with some engineering controls to reduce the level of the hazard at source. So that some salami slicing may be inevitable. Not including those with the practical knowledge of the activity. So again, this team approach. Failure to identify all hazards and outcomes associated with an activity. So not doing a thorough enough assessment of that activity. No consideration of as low as reasonably practical, or using reverse as low as reasonably practical. So what I'm considering here is either not considering how far you can get that level of risk down, but also picking a level and then working backwards from that in order to justify why you have picked that level. And so that's effectively making the decision before you've done the risk assessment. and then not acting on the risk assessment results, which is probably one of the most common ones, as people carry out the risk assessments, bring in a consultant, putting great expense and effort into this, but then the risk assessment sits on a shelf and the control measures that have been suggested never get enacted. So why bother doing the risk assessment at all in that situation? So this is a run through of risk assessment for qualitative risk assessment. I hope this has been a useful session. Thank you very much for listening.